Replace its aging fleet of submarines.
We are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them. We will manufacture it and they're going to be paying for it.
Canada's Prime Minister spending the day talking up the country's defense spending as the U.S. president demands more.
Canada is looking to replace its aging fleet of subs, potentially worth tens of billions of dollars.
The German-Norwegian partnership is one of the two finalists for the.
Donald Trump has just struck back, demanding that Canada hand over the $20 billion submarine contract so it can be redirected to American shipyards. Canada's response, a firm shake of the head. The consequence was immediate. One of the United States' key defense supply lines collapsed, from the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia to the steel mills in Pittsburgh. The shock spread rapidly. An entire industrial production hub was thrown into turmoil after Canada declared it would not spend a single dollar on submarines built in the United States. What had long been considered the lifeblood of America's defense industry was suddenly cut off. Tonight, the Pentagon is scrambling to find a way out of a crisis that threatens to undermine U.S. naval superiority. For months, Donald Trump has been warning that America's defense industry is being squeezed by unfair trade policies and foreign partners receiving preferential treatment. He vowed to bring submarine construction back to American soil, insisting that only American steel, American labor, and American technology can truly guarantee national security. But in reality, tensions with Canada have escalated. Earlier this summer, Washington imposed heavy tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminium, indispensable materials for submarine hull construction. Ottawa, unsurprisingly, did not stand idly by and retaliated with quotas and export restrictions. And now, as Trump demands that the $20 billion contract be secured for the United States, Canada has drawn a clear red line. A defense partnership once regarded as the closest in North America has suddenly been thrown into uncertainty. Before we go deeper into this story, don't forget to like and subscribe because what's coming next is something you won't want to miss. This morning in Ottawa, a major turning point unfolded. The Canadian government declared unequivocally that it would not comply with Washington's demand for the $20 billion submarine contract. These are the very contracts Trump insisted would save thousands of jobs in American industrial cities such as Groton, Connecticut, and Newport News, Virginia. Instead of letting those jobs flow south, Ottawa confirmed it would keep the entire project at home, assigning it to shipyards in Halifax and Vancouver. The impact was immediate. Trump lashed out, accusing Canada of undermining the foundations of U.S. defense and warning that Washington's naval advantage could falter without these agreements. In practice, Ottawa's decision cut off a vital supply of steel, electronics, and maritime technology that many American factories had come to rely on. Supply chains stretching from steel mills in Ohio to electronics facilities in Wisconsin have been shaken. Multi-billion-dollar orders, once expected to last for years, vanished overnight. Defense analysts stress that this is not merely a trade dispute. It represents a fracture in a defense partnership that has spanned decades during which Canada routinely outsourced large-scale naval projects to the United States. For the first time in modern history, Ottawa has chosen to keep the jobs at home rather than depend on American shipyards, a turning point that is rewriting the rules of defense cooperation. The impact rippled across the United States. In Washington, the Pentagon was forced to urgently revise its procurement plans and reallocate its budget. But the most visible consequences were not in political offices. They were in the industrial heartlands. Thousands of workers who had been counting on steady employment and overtime hours from this project woke up this morning only to learn that the $20 billion contract had vanished entirely. In Groton, Connecticut, home to one of America's most critical submarine shipyards, union leaders warned of looming layoffs within weeks if no replacement orders were secured. Meanwhile, in Newport News, Virginia, where Huntington-Less Industries had already prepared facilities and staffing for the project, labor representatives bluntly noted the steel had already been rolled in Pittsburgh, welders were on standby in Norfolk, and a host of contracts with suppliers in Ohio were now at risk of cancellation. A veteran mechanic lamented bitterly. Trump promised us mountains of jobs. Canada just pulled the plug, and we're the ones left standing on empty docks. The losses stretched far beyond the shipyards. In the Mahoning Valley of Ohio, steel plants that had been running at full capacity to produce submarine hull plates now stared at order books wiped clean. In Wisconsin, electronics firms producing sonar systems and communications equipment for submarines confirmed their contracts had been frozen immediately. Even in landlocked states such as Kansas and Missouri, small subcontractors supplying wiring, pumps, and precision cast components were hit just as hard. For many businesses, this collapse was not only the loss of opportunity, but a threat to their very survival. The damage went beyond economics. There was also a deep psychological shock. For months, Donald Trump had toured America's industrial towns, declaring that the submarine contract with Canada would be the foundation for a full revival of the defense sector. He tied it closely to his campaign promise of protecting American jobs and restoring manufacturing hubs that had been hollowed out for decades. At every stop from Toledo and Youngstown to Norfolk and Charleston, crowds cheered as Trump pledged that billions in naval investment would remain at home. But now those very communities are staring at headlines that have shattered their expectations. Some analysts warned that this sense of disillusionment could bring political consequences far beyond the fate of factories and shipyards. For American workers, the timing of this crisis could not be worse. Inflationary pressures are squeezing household budgets, while high interest rates make it harder for small businesses to access credit. In states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, where communities had only just begun to recover from previous waves of plant closures, the loss of the massive submarine contract has revived painful memories. Residents fear another cycle of instability is already taking shape. Local governments caution that unless immediate federal relief is provided, unemployment claims could surge by tens of thousands in the coming months. On Capitol Hill, the political response followed a familiar script. Republicans lined up behind Trump, swiftly placing blame on Ottawa and accusing Canada of betraying an ally while jeopardizing U.S. national security. One senator from Texas even declared that Canada had chosen to weaken the arsenal of the entire democratic world. On the other side, Democratic lawmakers stressed that it was Trump's harsh tariff policies that lay at the root of the crisis, pointing out that Washington had triggered the conflict earlier this year by imposing duties on Canadian steel and aluminum. Despite their differences, both parties tacitly acknowledged one reality. The American defense industry is now facing a multi-billion-dollar gap, and there is no easy fix to patch it. According to multiple sources, even Trump himself is losing his composure over the fallout. In closed-door meetings, he accused Canada of turning its back on the United States and siding with rivals simply by refusing to award contracts to American shipyards. In public appearances, he threatened to unleash additional tariffs, restrict bilateral defense cooperation, and even hinted at the possibility of pulling some NATO facilities out of Canada. Yet, no matter how sharp his rhetoric, the facts remain unchanged. The submarines will not be built in the United States. Welders and engineers in Halifax and Vancouver will be the ones carrying out the work, while yards in Connecticut and Ohio sit idle, waiting for phones that no longer ring. The first casualty is confidence. In defense industry towns across the United States, people have begun to ask themselves, if even Canada, the closest ally, refuses to yield, what does that mean for the future of American industry? This is no longer just an economic blow, but a political wound. And the repercussions are only beginning. By keeping the $20 billion contract within its borders, Ottawa has sidelined many U.S. factories while reshaping the strategic balance between the two countries. For decades, Washington had assumed defense cooperation with Ottawa was a given, an extension of shared borders, values, and common threats. But Canada's refusal marks a new course. Ottawa no longer wants to tie the fate of its defense industry entirely to the United States and is carving out a more independent path. This carries not only economic weight, but also profound symbolic meaning. Submarines are not like ordinary trade goods, such as lumber or farm produce. They are the foundation of naval power, the silent deterrence beneath the seas. Canada's decision to build submarines domestically instead of continuing to depend on U.S. yards is a clear declaration. Ottawa will not accept America's absolute dominance in defense production. Analysts in Washington see this as a signal that Canada is strengthening its autonomy while revealing its lack of confidence in Trump's approach to allied economic relations. From Europe to Asia, governments are watching closely. Allies such as Australia, Japan, and the United Kingdom, who often entrust submarine cooperation to the United States, are now weighing a critical question. Has Canada just set a precedent? If Ottawa can say no to Washington and still remain within NATO, why couldn't others do the same? This is precisely what alarms the Pentagon, a fragmented defense order in which nations build capabilities independently rather than relying on the U.S. The result would be rising costs, weakened cohesion, and most importantly, American firms losing lucrative contracts. For Washington, the risks this time are not only political but also economic on a massive scale. The $20 billion Ottawa has chosen to keep at home instead of sending to U.S. shipyards is not a single line item. Defense contracts are interlinked, forming entire industrial ecosystems. By investing in Halifax and Vancouver, Canada is simultaneously boosting its component suppliers, tooling companies, and tech firms, strengthening their position in global supply chains. From there, Canadian firms could begin competing for international defense orders. In other words, today's rejection of U.S. cooperation could become tomorrow's competitive advantage, not only for Canada, but also for any customer seeking equipment less politically sensitive than American-made products. Smaller European navies or even emerging Asian markets may soon view Canadian submarines as a more accessible, less controversial option. That prospect has left Washington uneasy as it strikes directly at America's traditional advantage, scale. For decades, the U.S. defense industry has functioned as a vast network with dozens of states producing components that were then assembled at a handful of major coastal shipyards. It was this scale that kept costs down while also ensuring political support since jobs were distributed across electoral districts. Canada's decision has shaken that model. If allies begin turning to other suppliers, American production will shrink, costs will rise, and the political consensus underpinning massive defense spending will be harder to sustain. Trump has cast the stalemate as proof of ungrateful allies. From the podium and in posts on Truth Social, he accused Ottawa of abandoning American workers while reviving long-standing disputes about burden sharing within NATO. Critics, however, argue that it was Trump's own tariff-heavy policies that brought the U.S. to this point. By slapping duties on Canadian steel and aluminum, Washington had directly raised the material costs of submarines it had been counting on. Ottawa, under domestic pressure to protect its factories and jobs, seized the moment to pivot. Rather than rely on American buyers, Canada is positioning itself as a producer and exporter of complete defense products. The impact of this shift is not confined to North America. Both China and Russia are watching closely. For Beijing, a weakened American defense industry is a strategic gift. If U.S. shipyards operate below capacity per unit costs climb, delivery schedules slow, and Washington's ability to sustain global naval presence erodus, Moscow, though constrained by sanctions, still capitalizes on the politics. It can cite cracks within NATO as evidence that the alliance is faltering. Even countries in the global south, rarely mentioned in such debates, may see opportunity. Brazil, India, and South Korea, all eager to expand naval capacity, could look to Canada as a model for pursuing independence from Washington. What makes Ottawa's move especially sensitive is that it sits at the intersection of economics and security. A dispute over lumber or dairy can be resolved with subsidies or side agreements. But submarines belong to another category. They are strategic assets tied to nuclear deterrence, maritime dominance, and core alliance commitments. By choosing to keep the contract at home, Canada has made more than an economic decision. It has issued a declaration of sovereignty. Our defense industry is no longer an appendage of the United States, and once such a message has been sent, it is not easily taken back. The long-term effects of this decision could reshape the entire structure of the defense sector. Ottawa is already quietly consulting European partners about technology sharing. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, each with its own naval industry, see Canada's pivot as an opportunity to build joint ventures outside Washington's direct orbit. If such arrangements materialize, a new NATO standard submarine supply chain could emerge that bypasses American contractors altogether. The risk for Washington is clear. The United States could find itself excluded from projects it once dominated. For Trump, the political risk is equally heavy. He built his brand on promises to restore American strength and negotiate from a position of dominance. Yet, this episode has exposed a different reality, one in which allies are willing to say no. even under pressure. That could reverberate domestically. In swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where manufacturing jobs remain vital for countless families, voters may now ask why Trump's tariff policies drove contracts away instead of creating more work. Democrats have been quick to seize the moment, portraying the $20 billion loss as the latest proof that extreme protectionism backfires. On the global stage, Washington's negotiating credibility has also been dented. Partners once wary of U.S. retaliation now feel emboldened. If Canada, long seen as a junior partner in North American defense, can stand firm against Trump, what would stop larger economies from doing the same? In Tokyo and Seoul, where defense procurement programs are politically sensitive, officials are reassessing their level of reliance on U.S. suppliers. In Europe, governments facing the rise of domestic populism may use Canada's example as justification to keep contracts at home rather than sending them abroad. The impact of this decision extends far beyond the military sphere. Defense spending is not just about warships or submarines. It is tied to research, innovation, and technologies that often find applications in civilian markets. By keeping submarine construction at home, Canada ensures that technologies such as sonar, battery systems, and stealth coatings will be developed in Canadian research institutes and companies. Universities, engineers, and domestic startups will be the direct beneficiaries. Meanwhile, U.S. tech firms, especially in Silicon Valley, see this as a troubling signal. The next breakthroughs could emerge in Vancouver rather than California. The security dimension is equally significant. Submarines are not only combat assets, but also tools for protecting strategic sea lanes. If the United States struggles to sustain its fleet, while Canada steps up investment, the balance of responsibility in the Atlantic and Pacific could shift. Ottawa has even hinted at expanding Arctic patrols, leveraging its geography to reinforce control over emerging shipping routes created by climate change. For Washington, this represents a double blow, a loss of influence with Canada, coupled with a weakened role along critical maritime corridors. The bigger question is what happens to NATO. For decades, the U.S. has shouldered the bulk of alliance spending with the expectation that allies would reinvest by purchasing from American defense contractors. Canada's decision breaks that precedent. If others follow, NATO could devolve into a looser network where each country prioritizes its own industries and workers. Such a shift would not only diminish U.S. influence, but also open the door for rivals to exploit division. Yet, the paradox is that Canada's assertion of independence may actually elevate its standing. European and Asian partners increasingly value suppliers not beholden to Washington's political cycles. Ottawa now has an opportunity to position itself as a mid-tier power hub, a bridge between American technology and global markets. For Washington, however, it is a grim outlook. U.S. influence is being eroded by its closest neighbor. Trump's response will determine how far the tension escalates. If he doubles down with tariffs and threats, Canada may be pushed more quickly into alternative alliances. If he consts, he risks appearing weak to his base. But whatever the scenario, one fact is already settled. The submarine contract is gone, and Canada's message is clear. The United States no longer holds absolute authority to dictate the terms of every deal. In an era where allies feel increasingly comfortable choosing their own path, Washington faces a sobering truth. The protectionist policies once sold as a shield for American workers are now accelerating the very decline they were meant to prevent. And the urgent question is what happens next? With the $20 billion submarine deal no longer in its hands, America faces risky choices. At the Pentagon, planners are scrambling to find a way forward. One option is to pour in federal funding to sustain domestic shipyards, plugging the gap left by Canada with taxpayer dollars. Congress could approve emergency spending, but that would mean tens of billions more added to an already bloated deficit. Another path is to chase new markets in Asia or the Middle East, persuading them to sign substitute contracts. Yet, such deals could take years, and U.S. credibility as a reliable partner is already in doubt. For Trump, the damage cut straight to a political weakness. He had pledged that tariffs would protect domestic jobs and revive manufacturing. But while steel cutters in Halifax are busy, workers in Groton are staring at potential layoffs, making his promises harder to defend. Trump's allies argue the U.S. must retaliate with fresh tariffs on Canadian defense goods or even restrict bilateral trade. Yet many experts warn such moves would only push Ottawa closer to alliances in Europe and Asia. The economic fallout is predictable. Without Canada, U.S. defense firms will struggle to maintain production at optimal scale, driving up costs not only for submarines, but also for aircraft carriers, destroyers, and even the civilian aerospace industry. The ripple effects could reach across the broader economy. Commercial aircraft in Seattle or high-tech batteries in Michigan may become more expensive, adding fresh inflationary pressure for American consumers. On the international stage, the dispute is accelerating the shift toward an already emerging multipolar order. Canada's decision shows that middle powers can challenge the United States and still stand firm. European officials have begun discussing joint defense programs independent of Washington. In Asia, many countries long accustomed to American dominance are now considering diversifying their supply chains from the outset. What matters here is not just the contract, but credibility. Can the United States still maintain the trust of its allies when its trade policies turn cooperation into a political burden? The larger risk lies in the strategic balance. The U.S. submarine fleet is already stretched thin across the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic. Delays or the loss of new orders could weaken deterrence precisely as rivals are accelerating. China is rolling out new submarines at breakneck speed, and Russia, despite sanctions, continues to invest in next-generation technology. If the U.S. pipeline dries up, production will slow, creating openings for competitors to surge ahead. The coming months will be a decisive test. If Congress and the administration move quickly with replacement measures, the damage could be contained. But if the rift deepens, Washington may have to accept a new reality. Allies will no longer automatically choose American workers and American steel as their first option. This is a warning not only about defense economics, but about the United States' global standing. From now on, major contracts from warships and aircraft to emerging technologies like military artificial intelligence could become arenas of fierce competition where the U.S. no longer holds a monopoly. A single canceled $20 billion contract has become the marker of a new era, one in which allies carve out their own paths, adversaries exploit divisions, and America struggles to sustain a role once considered unassailable. The submarine contract dispute is not merely a trade setback. It is a test of America's strength, credibility, and adaptability. Workers in Groton may have lost jobs immediately, but on the global level, the real questions about America's role are only beginning. Will Congress ramp up spending to prop up the defense industry, or will adversaries seize the opportunity first? If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates. We'll continue tracking the developments that are reshaping the future of North American security and economics. And leave us a comment. Do you think Trump's tariff policies are protecting American workers, or are they in fact pushing allies toward other alliances?